Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. The Islamic State has a huge online and media operation. Alberto Fernandez led the effort at the State Department to counter their jihadist propaganda. They have like 40,000, 50,000 Twitter accounts.
They did.
You guys had 6.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. If you're a young, idealistic man with propensity to violence, there was nothing that we could offer that would be an alternative to what ISIS was offering.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. Some estimates put the number of ISIS Twitter accounts at over 50,000. They use social media to spread their propaganda, recruit, and intimidate. From 2012 to 2015, Ambassador Alberto Fernandez led an office at the State Department called the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. Essentially, his job was to lead the effort to convince foreign audiences not to join ISIS or believe their ideology. He's currently vice president at the Middle East Media Research Institute. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
How big of a presence does ISIS have online?
Well, compared to other groups, the presence is still huge. The footprint across platforms of ISIS is really large. It's much larger than everyone else. That said, they've declined from their peak period in late 2014, early 2015. They clearly are on a downslide.
Are they organized in their media approach, or is it just a bunch of their followers out there tweeting and retweeting?
Well, it's both. I mean, they themselves are extremely organized when it comes to media. They prioritize media. They spend a lot of money. Media operators for ISIS get paid more than regular fighters. Each province of ISIS has its own media apparatus, and they're super organized, extremely organized on an institutional level. Aside from that, they have this diffuse, not organized network or swarm of fanboys, of supporters online and social media, which is a kind of a unique thing that they have. So they're both super organized, and they also embrace the chaos of social media at the same time.
Because you've called their approach to media and propaganda revolutionary compared to other terrorist groups.
Yes, I mean, first of all, what they do in their own production of media traditionally is a lot bigger than everyone else. To give you an example, in the last calendar Hijra year, Islamic year, that they counted media, ISIS produced close to 1,800 videos. That's a lot of videos. That's them themselves producing that, the different states and ISIS Central. They produced them in 8 languages. They produced 50,000 graphics, photographs, banners, posters, all of that stuff. That's a lot of stuff that they produce. That's them. And then they have the supporters, people in the West or in the Middle East, who are basically taking all that stuff and reposting it, repackaging it, placing it all over the place.
So isn't the solution then to have Twitter and Facebook and YouTube just take down their accounts or bar their content?
Well, yes, that's part of the solution. I mean, I first of all would say that, of course, you cannot confuse media with the content of the media. And ISIS' appeal is not because of its media. ISIS' appeal is because of its message. But leaving that aside, of course, there's a lot more you can do, and you see that now. Social media companies, government, and others have made a concerted effort over the past year to kind of reduce the ISIS footprint in social media, and that has had some success. I mean, the ISIS presence, for example, today on Twitter is a shadow of what it was a year ago.
Because Twitter has been taking down their accounts.
Twitter has been taking stuff down. Now, what happens is they take stuff down in one place and they go somewhere else. So they've shifted, for example, from Twitter to Telegram, which is this German, Russian site app that ISIS likes to use as well. So they go, it's like whack-a-mole. You stop them here and they go somewhere else. But it's clear that even on Twitter, where they get knocked off and they come back, there's one guy who boasted about having been knocked off 500 times, and he keeps coming back. But a lot of people get discouraged after maybe 50 times or 100 times or 200 times. So the efforts of social media companies and government is actually beginning to have an effect. Now, that doesn't excuse or doesn't get away from the challenge of the message itself.
The office that you led was created by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Why did you feel the need to create this office?
I think the sense is that there was a feeling in government that that first decade of our war against Salafi jihadists of Al-Qaeda, 2001, 2011, had not been a huge success in the field of propaganda, in the field of messaging. And they sensed one thing, that for the enemy, for Al-Qaeda, media was really important. In fact, Ayman al-Zawahiri said, media is more than half the battle. That's a famous quote that he used actually talking to the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq at the time. So for them, that was really important. Shouldn't it be really important for us? So the idea was to have an interagency office or shop where, at the very least, everyone would be looking at, thinking about, and working on that very same subset, the propaganda war, the media war. That was the idea.
Let's talk about the message itself.
Mm-hmm.
What is the message that ISIS is putting out there that is so attractive to not only the young disaffected, but they're attracting middle-aged professionals?
Yeah. Well, it's a multifaceted message. You could say it has kind of three components. I mean, it has many components, but you can reduce it to three components. Number one is the Salafi jihadist message. So it draws on a Salafi worldview of Islam, formative Islam, and the jihadist way of doing Salafism. In other words, violent Salafism. That's where it comes from, which has a long history in Islam and in the Muslim world, and that's something that has specifics about it. Second of all, it talks about something which is real, a real state, a real entity. The caliphate is declared, ISIS declares the caliphate only after the fall of Mosul, when it actually has, at least on the ground in some kind of real way, something physical. So you have a Salafi jihadist worldview coupled with a call to build a real thing, a real state, a real caliphate. It's not about something pie in the sky that eventually is going to happen.
Which was Al-Qaeda's thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Al-Qaeda was pro-caliphate. But for Al-Qaeda, the caliphate was going to happen sometime in an indeterminate, vague future.
Right.
For ISIS, it's khilafah now, caliphate right now. And the third part, so you have Salafi jihadism, the real state, the caliphate. And the third part, an appeal to the individual, especially to individual youth. In other words, you young person watching this video, you have a role to play in building the state, in self-actualization.
And you have a duty as a Muslim to do it.
Yes, exactly. But it's a duty as a Muslim, so it's a religious duty, but clothed in a postmodern language of personal empowerment, of individualism, of redemptive violence, of sex, of all of these things. So it's a very seductive package for some people, especially some types of young people, especially young people that may be alienated or have problems with identity or don't know who the heck they are.
So your job then was to counter all that. What is the most effective counter message?
Well, the most effective counter message is obviously to show the gap between what they say and what they do. We've seen that, and it's been studied, that this is a message about certain things and the reality is otherwise. So for example, if ISIS talks, and they do, they talk about this unstoppable, growing, powerful state. Baqiya wa tatamaddad, that's their motto, right? Here to stay and growing. If you can show that they're not here to stay and they're not growing, that they're losers, that is a way of weakening their appeal. That's why the military security dimension of ISIS is so important. I remember when I was at CSCC, trying to counter the fall of Mosul with a video. Well, guess what? You can't counter the fall of Mosul with a video because the fall of Mosul is something real that happened. Mm-hmm. The only way to counter that is for them to lose Mosul or to lose on the battlefield. So showing the gap between the rhetoric and the reality is the safest and the surest way of doing it. But that's not an easy thing to do.
Whenever they lose on the battlefield, though, they will go and blow up a market in Baghdad. They'll attack a European city.
Yes.
So they're always winning.
That's the image they want to give, and they've been pretty successful at doing so. In other words, their preference is to show advancement on the ground. They would love to show themselves marching into Baghdad or marching into Damascus, right? The fall of cities, the armies, crossing and taking territory. That's their preference. If they don't have that, they do exactly what you said. They do other things to look like they are winning. They're in the news business, but they're also in the news-making business. So military victory is the preference. But if you don't have military victory, what can you use? You can do something that's going to generate coverage. The ISIS passport, the ISIS dinar, the ISIS credit card. I'm joking, but whatever, the ISIS whatever. Or exotic ways of killing people. Burning them alive, dropping them in acid, drowning them in a swimming pool, clickbait, I mean, they're click fiends like Kim Kardashian, They'll put stuff out that people want to look at or want to see. And then terrorist attacks and the growth of the franchises. So ISIS maybe is retreating in Syria and Iraq, but they can say, well, we're advancing in Libya, we're advancing in Yemen, we're advancing all over the place.
Sinai.
Which gives the image or the appearance of forward motion and growth. They are kind of like part shark and part pufferfish. Shark needs to keep swimming if it's not going to sink. ISIS needs to keep advancing. And they're like a pufferfish because they need to make themselves look bigger and meaner and more powerful than they actually are.
Think Again, Turn Away is a campaign at the State Department.
It was a campaign.
This was in 2014. You were still there.
Yeah.
There's a video that was put together called Welcome to ISIS Land.
Yeah.
It was graphic. It was gruesome. It was sarcastic.
Yeah.
There were things like, come to ISIS land, you can blow up mosques, you can kill Muslims,
Yeah.
and actually showing their images.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Well, I think what we were thinking is an extension of what we've been doing in Arabic for years. I mean, we began doing videos in Arabic in 2011, and you do whatever you can. You try the factual approach, you try the comedic approach, you try the sarcasm approach, you try the dissonance approach. So Think Again, Turn Away, and that specific video, Welcome to ISIS Land, it's actually kind of funny that it got so much attention because it was not that different from dozens of videos along the same lines that we did in Arabic. It was basically trying to do a type of propagandistic jujitsu, using their images, using their narrative against them. They have all kinds of videos saying what? Come to ISIS land. Come, you're going to have a great, especially at that time, you're going to have a great life here.
But that violence isn't a turnoff for people. I
Well,
mean, ISIS glories in that
It is
death
and it
and
isn't.
destruction.
I mean, you have to remember, the ISIS message is multifaceted. So of course, an appeal to violence is part of its attraction. There's no doubt about that. But also remember, these are the guys that put out videos talking about, 5-star jihad, living in nice houses, living large, living well. So it was to counter that kind of appeal. Like, you're going to have a great life here in ISIS land. I mean, I think a lot of the criticism of that video was by people who actually were not familiar with what we'd been doing in Arabic for the past 2 years before, and also not really familiar with the jihadist spirit.
Let's talk about what you guys actually put out. You use social media in Arabic, Urdu, Somali. What are you saying?
Well, what we were saying, of course, I left over a year ago, and I think since I left, the government has gone a different way. There was not one message. You basically looked at, on a daily basis, at what the adversary was saying What were their themes? What were the points they were trying to reach? And then try to find something, anything, that you could do to respond to their message. I mean, one of the problems we faced is that their messaging was a reflection of what they were actually doing. And in our messaging, we really couldn't talk that much about what we're doing. I'll give you an example. Syria, huge part of the ISIS appeal, 2013 and 2014, even 2012, was about Syria. We were hamstrung by U.S. foreign policy on Syria. We would go and talk about, don't join Al-Qaeda in Syria, don't be with ISIS. And people in Arabic, and sometimes in English, they would say, how come you guys talk about ISIS, you don't say anything about Assad? And what we're going to say, red line, kind of ridiculous pablum that the State Department put out. There was no strong response. If you're a young, idealistic young man with maybe a propensity to violence, there was nothing that we could offer that would be an alternative to what ISIS was offering.
Did you guys ever engage on the religious level? Or did you kind of take a hands-off, that's not our job approach?
Not a lot. I mean, some of the people that worked in the office and the operation were Muslims. In fact, many of them were Muslims or are Muslims. But we did think that it's not a good fit for the U.S. government to talk about religion.
Isn't that a big part of this?
It is a big part of it. But we have credibility issues in general. But the idea that the U.S. government is going to say that, this verse from the Quran says this or that, we didn't see that as particularly credible. Now, what we did do is use them saying things. For example, there's one video where we put out in 2013 or 2014 where Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the official spokesman of ISIS, he said this in a video. He said, do you think because you pray 5 times a day and face to the 2 Qiblas and say there is no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet? In other words, if you think you're a Muslim and you think that you're free from harm, you're not. We decide whether you're really a Muslim or not. We decide whether you're free from harm or not. So we used his words to say, look at the arrogance of this guy. He's deciding you're not really a good Muslim, or you're not Muslim enough, or you are a kafir, you can be slaughtered without mercy. So we used their religious discourse against them. That was the idea.
I mentioned before that they have like 40,000, 50,000 Twitter accounts.
They did.
You guys had 6.
Yeah, that's right.
So how is it that we invented social media, we invented the internet. How are we so out-resourced?
Well, I think part of the problem is philosophical, and it kind of goes back to the way government looks at media. Despite the advances in social media, much of government still looks at media in an analog way, in the kind of the tradition of the public affairs, of the spokesperson of the department or the Department of Defense or whatever. Government has been uncomfortable in embracing the chaos and the risk that is social media. CSCC was a lot riskier, a lot more chaotic, a lot more forward-leaning than the rest of the government, but it was nowhere near what it needed to be. I mean, we would respond to a pro-ISIS tweet, maybe a couple of hours after they said it. That's really slow in social media terms. On the other hand, that's really fast in U.S. government terms. So you see the problem there.
The Obama administration doesn't use the term Islamic terrorism or Islamic radicalization.
Yeah.
They say violent extremism.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's kind of a dodge. I understand, obviously, they do not want to give offense, and ISIS and Islam are not the same thing. But you have to address the nature of the entity. And ISIS is a Salafi jihadist organization. That means something. That means something within the context of Islamic history. And they are steeped in a certain type of Islamic discourse. Not all Islamic discourse, but a certain type. And so to combat them, you have to engage. You have to kind of go deep into these things. Doesn't mean the US government should be trading chapter and verse on the Quran with Muslims. But you have to understand, for example, if they talk about we don't kill innocent people, well, it depends on your definition of the word innocent.
Right.
Right? You have to understand the meaning of words like kuffar or taghut or al-wala wal-bara. These are Islamic terms which ISIS uses to mean a specific thing. And so you'd be a fool if you didn't understand that.
You know, Secretary Kerry always uses the term Daesh.
Yes.
Which is the Arabic version of ISIS.
Yes.
What do you think of that? Is that...
Well, you know, I was asked, when I was in government, I was asked my opinion about this. And I said, yes, using Daesh was fine. Government didn't do anything. My idea was that at the beginning, the what to call the organization was not fully formed. But by the time they started calling ISIS Daesh, ISIS was pretty well established. So it was kind of ridiculous for them to adopt it late. I mean, there are examples, analog examples. For example, Hamas. We call Hamas Hamas.
Yeah.
Hamas means zeal, as you know. We don't call them zeal. Boko Haram means, you know, education is forbidden. We call them Boko Haram. So there are examples, but those are examples of where the term was adopted early and stuck. So by the time the administration started using Daesh, it was an affectation.
So let me ask you this, Ambassador, because some people say that it's American foreign policy that's to blame for radicalizing Muslims. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, our support for Israel.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, the concept of Salafi jihadism predates all of that. I mean, consider in 1802, a Salafi jihadist army came out of what is now Saudi Arabia and sacked the city of Karbala and put every single Shia, man, woman, and child to the sword. It wasn't because of Israel. It wasn't because of America. It wasn't because of Guantanamo. So there is a Salafi jihadist worldview which predates any of these current political issues. It's a dodge to say that foreign policy is the reason. Foreign policy is a contributing factor, of course. But if you look at what ISIS says about itself and about the world, it's not really about any of those issues. When ISIS released its gold dinar video, you know, it showed the gold dinar. On the back of the gold dinar is what? A map of the world. And they said, the reason there's a map of the world on the back of the gold dinar is because this is the territory that is to be controlled by the Islamic State. The rule of Allah is to be the world. This has nothing to do with any of these current political issues.
Does the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communication still exist at the State Department?
Well, that's a good question for the State Department to answer, not me. They made some changes. They seem to have come up, rebranded it with a new name. As far as I can tell in their kind of confusing messaging, basically what they did is they took a lot of the old stuff that we used to do and repackaged it.
I think it's Global Engagement Center now.
That's right.
Which doesn't have anything to do with terrorism.
Exactly. I mean, I guess they thought maybe not mentioning the terrorism word would make it go away. I don't know.
If you were back in government, what would you want to be doing?
Well, I wouldn't want to be doing what I was doing.
Why?
I think it was a thankless task. It was an important issue which Secretary Clinton saw as important. Once she left government, a lot of people did not think it was important.
Including Secretary Kerry?
Less so, and people like Ben Rhodes and others. I think it was just different. There was not the same kind of support that there had been when she was there. So it was, you were making bricks without straw. You were basically addressing a big issue with limited resources. When I began, I had $5 million. In 2012, I had a $5 million budget. And when I left, I had a $5.5 million budget. So it was important work. It was substantive work, but I always felt that I was fighting that battle with one hand, maybe both hands, tied behind my back.
So what would you want to do?
Well, I would, like I said, I would prefer not to do that. If you're going to do something like that, you have to at least have two things. You have to fully fund the work that you're doing, and you have to be truly empowered. And that means the freedom to tell others what to do, knowing that they're going to do it. I never had that. CSCC could coordinate, which basically meant telling other people some ideas, giving them some suggestions, which then they would ignore. You need to have real power and real authority to tell people to do things that are going to affect the real political world, because propaganda is connected to the world of politics. It's not by itself. It's a reflection of real political decisions. When Secretary Kerry or President Obama say something ridiculous in the Arab Muslim space, it has a propaganda aspect to it.
Well, Ambassador, I want to thank you so much for being on the program. Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and leave me your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.